Well, all right, now we've done all the work, right? We've crafted a beautiful biblical sermon. There's only one last thing to do, and that's actually to deliver the sermon, right? To preach it. And this is going to be hard. This is going to be a hard video for me because there's a lot of things that you can do to improve your delivery. You want to be as effective as possible. Some of this has to do with preaching. Some of this has to do with just general communication tools. And I'll also say delivery varies a lot with culture. And this is a cross-cultural communications class, right? So we have to pay attention to what's going on and what's normal in the culture, because some cultures are very animated. There's tons of movement. There's lots of volume. There's a greater length or a shorter length. And it's necessary for us as a communicator to connect with our audience in a way that they're used to. So when I've traveled, when I've spoken, when I've preached at other churches and other countries, right, I really try as best I can to get a feel for their service. Like, what do their preachers do? What do their teachers do? What's the norm here? What's the length? What is, do I jump up and down? Do I raise my voice? Do I not? Do I move my hands? Do I need to just stand there and speak? It's very, very different across the world, right? And so in my church, right, at Impact Church, right, where it's very, very different than the way that I've preached in South America or in Africa or in Asia, right? So the way that we speak is super important. Keep it natural, right? A natural delivery is consistent with the preacher's personality and the normal ways that he expresses himself. So don't make yourself something that you're not. It should feel pretty close to natural for you, including your tone, your language, your pace, your posture, like the way you are. But again, we have to adjust some of those things, like I just said. And you can adjust and you can get better, right? But you shouldn't do something that's completely opposite of who you are, right? Sermon. So let me give you a couple styles of communication. I'm going to give you three. There's different ways to do this. There's also an impromptu sermon, which I have not put up, but the first is a manuscript. We talked about this a couple videos ago. This is something you're going to have to do from this style, right? When it comes to delivery, here's how a manuscript plays out. And I know lots of guys who preach from full manuscripts. They write out every single week, every single word of their whole entire sermon, right? So depending on font size and the paper and all the things, you're talking about, somewhere between 6 and 12 pieces of paper that have every single word for every single thing, right? And they will more or less read their manuscripts. That's one way of communication. Another is memorization. You can go no notes, right? From the extreme of manuscript to having all of the notes with every single word to no notes where you just completely try to memorize things. This is also very, very difficult. Memorization is super hard because there's a lot of words in a 30-minute sermon, right? And so this can happen if you are only every now and then preaching, or you're preaching at a big conference and you really want to do well. You want to think through and you have all of the time to really think through it all. Then maybe you can get there, right? Then there's what's called extemporaneous preaching, and extemporaneous preaching is a little bit different. It's basically to preach with an outline, right? The fourth time, which I mentioned, I didn't actually include, is called impromptu, right? We want to avoid that. Somebody who is a biblical a preacher who wants to deliver a biblical sermon should avoid temptation to preach an impromptu sermon. And there's a lot of reasons for that, because impromptu sermons are just something we make up on the fly and we're just going for it, right? So here's me personally, right? My personal style, I'll just let you behind the curtain a little bit. My personal style is about a 50-50 mix of a manuscript and extemporaneous preaching. Here's what I mean by that, why I say 50-50, because I don't write out every single word every single week. I've preached way too many times for me to feel like that's 100% necessary. Now, I do think through and I prepare every single word. So I will preach as I prepare my delivery. I will preach out loud in my office multiple times the week prior to that, right? So I'm literally thinking about pace and diction and volume and all of the breathing and all of those things. So that's why I practice it out loud. So I really plan through every word. I just don't write everything down. My outline, however, the outline that I take with me into the pulpit is more detailed than most outlines. So it's not just like 3 or 4 points, right? It's usually two to 4 pages, depending on the sermon, the length, and those sorts of things, right? And all of my key phrases, my key points, they're written out in my outline verbatim, right? But it's not the whole entire work. It's not the whole entire sermon. So you're going to have to work to develop a rhythm that works for you. The primary thing I would just say is just to kind of remember to avoid the temptation to preach an impromptu sermon, right? Those impromptu sermons very rarely land. They often stray away from the biblical text, and they usually present more of an opinion than the authority of the scriptures. So let's talk about finding your voice. And when I say finding your voice, I'm talking very literally, like thinking through your voice, like how you speak. As a musician, like we would do vocal warm-ups. We would do this every time before I sang, before I would go to rehearsal. I would do vocal warm-ups, right? I would take care of my vocal cords. Like I want to make sure that I'm not hurting myself, I'm not screaming, I'm not whatever, damaging my vocal, because it hurts, it's important. So why don't we do that as preachers, right? We should. So I want to look at our voice, because this is a part of delivery. I want to look at our voice, our pitch, our pace, our volume, and our articulation. That's kind of how we're going to frame the idea about voice. So when we talk about pitch, right? Pitch refers to the tonal quality of sound of your voice. And here's what we say. We just want to preach within the normal range of your voice. Like you've watched enough of my videos to know, right, how I speak and my normal tone and those sorts of things, right? And it may change slightly, but you shouldn't talk at a completely different pitch just because you're preaching. And that may sound crazy, right? But I've seen it a lot. I've seen people adopt accents, or they speak higher, or they try to speak lower just because they think that's the better way a preacher sounds. And then what happens is when you actually talk to them in real life, you're like, that's not the way that guy talks, right? And it seems fake. It seems like you're putting on a show. And if that's what you're portraying, right, then nobody's going to trust the biblical authority. So the way in which we speak, the pitch of our words, it's all connected to the authority of the scripture, right? So we also want to talk about pace. Pace is very important for us to consider. The pace is literally the rate in which you speak words. So variety in pace also helps create interest. So when we speak a lot faster, we got a lot of stuff to go, and we blah, 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 we get through it, then people are like, whoa, what's happening? And when we slow down, then people are like, hey, maybe this is something I got to pay attention to, right? So we want to keep our pace at a rate that aids comprehension. So we want to, what I mean by this is we don't want to speak so fast that nobody can understand us and they can't keep up because you're just talking 100 miles an hour and they blah, blah, blah. Right? But we also don't want, right? Do you see how the pace can change? We don't want to talk so slowly that it puts everybody to sleep. Right, so we kind of have to find this rhythm with our pace. We don't want to speak too fast or too slow. Here's what happens when we speak too fast. Often when we speak too fast, we get winded ourselves. Like if we're not rehearsed, if we're not practiced, we run out of breath. And then we're breathing into our microphone, or we're breathing a lot, or we have to stop and we have to take our breath, and everybody's, you can tell, right? It just interrupts your rhythms. Or if you're speaking too fast, you may just fly all the way through something without your audience really understanding it or having the opportunity to feel it. On the other side, if we speak too slowly, then our audience usually stops paying attention. They'll just unengage. They'll fall asleep. And here's what happens. You lose them completely. So as you can imagine, we've talked about this before in other contexts, but in somewhere where you want to land is somewhere in the middle. Like you want to have time to breathe. The variety of fast and slow keeps their attention, still lets them understand. And when you pause, people pay attention. Like you've got to vary up your pace. Then we talk about volume. Volume is literally how loud you speak. The key to volume is adequacy and variety. And here's what I mean by that. You have to be loud enough for them to hear you. So if you're speaking to a room or outside or wherever it may be, like you have to speak loud enough that everybody can hear you, right? But listen, if you're just screaming at them the whole time, right? They're out, man. They're not paying attention. One of the things we have to pay attention to when it comes to volume and adequacy is something we just kind of call the trail off syndrome. And the trail off syndrome is really, really common, especially when somebody is not used to speaking in front of a group or they're a little bit nervous. And here's what I mean by that is you start talking and then you get to your point and you just kind of lower your volume. And you're really excited about this and then it just goes away. And so when we lower our volume towards the end of our sentences or the end of our thoughts, and then what happens is, again, nobody can hear it. If they can't hear it, they can't pay attention to it, right? So pay attention to your volume. Make sure that it's adequate, and make sure that it changes. So you get louder at some points, you get quieter at some points. Then we talk about articulation, and articulation is literally how we shape sounds into letters and words that communicate. This is why it's often effective to let a couple of words in your main points start with the same letters. So I try to keep, if I have a sermon that has 3 points to it, I want my points, all 3 phrases, to be the same sort of phrase. They don't have to rhyme. They don't have to be, but if it's a this and this, then all 3 of them say this and this, right? And they're very closely connected. So we want to try to be in the same articulation. Sometimes we want them to all start with the same letter. That we call that articulation, right? Alliteration. So we say things like powerful preaching, right? You hear that powerful preaching. Preach powerfully with passion, right? Or even the name of this class, cross-cultural communication, right? That CCC, that all right, so you can emphasize things just by choosing the right words, right? By choosing the right letters. This is just a way to increase that in your articulation. Pronunciation is also we want to, as we articulate, right? We want to shape sounds, but we also want to work on our pronunciation, right? It's literally the correct sounding of a word. So when we come to Old Testament stuff and we have names, places, phrases that are just difficult for you, especially when we're reading the biblical text, practice those things. Pay attention to them. Look it up. See how the word was pronounced, and then listen to it and practice it over and over and over. So we want to make sure that we're articulate, that we pronounce things correctly. So it's not just what you say or how you say it. There's also body language. This is also a big part of delivery. This is the visual aspect, and it's vitally important to communication. So when we talk about our hands and our feet, body movement shows it should correspond to the message and its meaning. So we're talking about highs and we're talking about lows, right? We're talking about over here, and then we're talking about over here, right? So we show separation. We may walk to different sections when we've got a stage or in front of people. We may say, "Hey, over here was Israel in the wilderness, and then over here was Israel in the Promised Land." And so every time we talk about Israel in the wilderness, we go to this side of the stage and we use the left side of our hands. And every time we talk about Israel in the Promised Land, we go to the right side of the stage and we talk with our right hands over here, right? So those are just easy ways. So if we're presenting contrasting points to be on one side or the other side, these are simple things, but really, really effective visually. So we show contrast with our movements. We can also track movement of thought, of progression of ideas, etc. It's not just our hands and our feet, it's also our face. And our face talks just as much as our mouths do, right? So our facial expressions is probably the most important of all of our body language, right? Our face communicates the entire range of human emotion and attitude. So from excitement to fear to anticipation to humor, it's all there in our face. Like, pay attention to what your face is doing, what your eyes are doing, what you're looking at, like your mouth, your cheeks, your eyebrows, all of it. Pay attention to your face. Eye contact. Like, I don't know if you ever got told, my dad used to tell me this when he would get on to me when I was a kid. Like, look at me, boy. Like, look at me when you're talking to me. So pay attention. Like, eye contact is very, very important to body language, right? It says that you care about your audience. Eye contact says that you have something important to say. When we're talking about eye contact, you also want to make sure that you're looking at the entire audience. So you're moving your eyes around to the far lefts, to the far rights, up the middle, in the sides. Like, you have to look around, and you want to look straight at the audience. You don't want to just look down the whole time. You also don't want to look up the whole time. You want to look right at the audience, and focus on persons who exude energy. So I've got some guys. I actually have some Africans in my church, right? And they're a little bit more animated than most. And when they are, like, I try to focus on them. I try to look at them a lot. But we want to be careful not to focus on one person or one place in the sermon where we just want to vary it. We want to move around a lot. Some things to avoid. We want to avoid a monotone or expressionless or drawn-out delivery. We also don't want to imitate other preachers. So if somebody, this is his style, we don't want to go, well, his church is really big, I just want to do whatever he's doing. Like, don't fall into that trap. Avoid anything that distracts you or the audience. So don't do those sorts of things. There's a couple other just kind of other issues that kind of just often hinder effective cross-cultural communication. I couldn't think of a way to categorize them, so I just said other issues, and change it up. Like, when we're talking about pitch or volume or gestures or movement, facial expressions, just change it, move it. Like, avoid monotony. Don't just be the same all the time, every time. Change it up. Change the way you talk. Like, pay attention to it. If there's some bad grammatical habits that you fall into, just work on breaking those habits. Like, incorrect grammar can hinder communication. It plays a huge role. There's also this idea of memory. This helps when you're not looking down at your notes, right? You don't have to memorize 100%. Again, we talked about this earlier. You don't have to be there. You can, but it's not generally my style. But you want to know where you're going so that you're not stuck in one place, so you don't have to look directly at your notes the whole entire time. Often I try, especially when it comes to illustrations and or applications, introductions, I try to have the majority of that memorized so that I can really focus on my audience. I can make eye contact and do those sorts of things. So introduction, sometimes conclusion. If you can memorize a biblical text, that's great. I actually prefer to read the biblical text because I want to put the Bible, the paper written word of God, central in things. And so that, for me, that's just part of it. So you memorize your illustrations, again, thinking through every single word, every single thing. Here's one of the last things I want to share is you want to leave your audience wanting more. Like, don't waste your words. Don't overword things. Shorter sermons are often, they're more difficult to craft. They're very difficult, right? But they're also often much more effective. I used to think that it was a lot harder to preach for an hour than it would to be to preach for 30 minutes, right? And I even often judged a good sermon by how long it was. Like, mostly as the preacher, right? My better sermons are going to be longer sermons, right? But that's just not the case, right? It's much harder to craft a shorter sermon. Get to the point, illustrate it, apply it, and then end it. We just use this, we always just say land the plane, right? Don't just circle the runway, like, land the plane. It doesn't make you look smarter to go longer. I think it actually makes you look less prepared. So when you can deliver a powerful sermon that's concise and effective, people love it. One of my mentors in ministry, he had been a pastor for 40 plus years. Towards the end of his life in ministry, I asked him, I just said, hey, is there anything you would change? Like, as you looked back, is there anything you would change about your preaching? He said, I would change two things. He said, I would preach shorter and I would preach simpler, right? So hear those words. Take that to heart. So as we kind of wrap up this whole entire class, don't forget to evaluate everything. Go back, listen, watch, get feedback. It may be awkward for a little while. It's going to feel weird, but it's going to make you a better and more effective cross-cultural communicator.